listening to The Sustainable Angler, and my daddy is the host.
All right, well, special thanks to my sweetheart for the introduction, and welcome to The Sustainable Angler, the podcast where we discuss the intersection of fishing, conservation, and sustainability. I'm your host, Rick Crawford. So I'm super excited to share this new 4-part series called The Rise of Sustainability Regulations with special guest James Pollack from Marten Law, where we will take a deep dive into PFAS, Extended Producer Responsibility, or EPR, for packaging and textiles, climate-related disclosures, and green marketing claims that are impacting fishing and outdoor brands all over the country over the next 4 weeks. At Emerger Strategies, I help brands reduce cost, enhance their reputation, and customer loyalty by measuring and improving their sustainability performance. I also help them mitigate risks by helping them navigate PFAS, EPR, and climate regulations. But I thought it would be beneficial for business owners and brands listening to hear it from James, who's an environmental and regulatory lawyer who helps outdoor gear, apparel, and footwear industries reduce their environmental impact and market sustainability in transparent ways. James counsels trusted national brands on the complicated regulatory and litigation environments surrounding material inputs, emerging contaminants, green marketing claims, and climate impacts, and I'm thrilled to share this special podcast series on the rise of sustainability regulations with y'all. In this episode, James and I take a deep dive into Extended Producer Responsibility, or EPR. And we talk about the history of EPR for products like mattresses, as well as how EPR works and how it will affect fishing and outdoor brands related to packaging and textiles. We dive into how EPR for packaging incentivizes less packaging through eco-modulation and smaller EPR fees for packaging that is recyclable or compostable, such as paper. Timelines for states like Oregon, California, and Colorado. And we also dive into California's EPR for Textiles Law, SB 707, and James provides some tips for collecting EPR data. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoy. The Sustainable Angler is available anywhere you listen to podcasts and is also airing Saturdays at 2 p.m. on Charleston's first and only community-supported radio station, Home Radio, 96.3 FM. If you like what you're hearing, an absolutely free way to show your support is by leaving it a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcast or Spotify. This episode of the Sustainable Angler podcast is brought to you by Emerger Strategies and A New Earth Project, the sustainability initiative of Atlantic Packaging.
We set out with A New Earth Project to really start a movement.
It's a global coalition of people who are deeply concerned and want to accelerate the transition away from problematic packaging to more sustainable solutions.
Our entire value proposition was built on helping companies package things better. We were doing sustainability before sustainability was cool. We just called it packaging optimization. And packaging optimization really is about using less. And we built our whole business on that. You know, people send us their products, their goods, and we help them design packaging systems and solutions for the least possible cost, utilizing the least amount of material. Use less is always the right answer.
And that's what I see with companies like A New Earth Project is it's like, we're just trying to create solutions for big companies and small, that makes it easier for them, cheaper for them, whatever it is, and then has less impact. Not just trying to tell people you should have less impact and making the choice forced on them. Like, make it better for everybody, and it'll make it better for the whole world.
We see the problem, and we are with you.
Did you know that sustainability isn't just the right thing to do, it's smart business? At Emerger Strategies, we simplify sustainability for small and medium-sized businesses, helping you meet retailer demands, build customer loyalty, and protect the planet. Whether you're navigating retailer sustainability assessments, tackling EPR for packaging requirements, or measuring your carbon footprint, we help you measure and improve your brand's sustainability performance. Our clients in the fishing and outdoor industries are thriving, saving time and money, and growing their businesses, all while reducing their environmental footprint. We've been simplifying sustainable business since 2016, empowering brands like yours to make a real impact without the need to hire, train, and retain a full-time sustainability team. Ready to make sustainability your competitive advantage? Visit emergerstrategies.com to learn how we can help your business profit sustainably.
Thank you. No, I appreciate the invitation. And unfortunately, today's going to be another day of acronyms. And so I'm glad that we're setting the first one on the table in the first minute.
That's right.
Extended Producer Responsibility, or EPR. We're going to be talking about EPR and PROs and all kinds of fun acronyms. So maybe it's helpful to sort of step back and level set, like, what is EPR, or extended producer responsibility?
100%.
So it's a general policy approach. It's a way of constructing a regulation. The goal of it is to assign responsibility for the end of life of a product on the producers of the product.
Right.
And generally speaking, responsibility looks like money. So it's charging money to the makers of products to deal with the waste that is generated by putting those products on the market. So, we buy things every day. We use them, and then at the end of their usefulness, have to dispose of them. And we're used to having, bins that we put out on the street, or however it is that we dispose of things. There are costs associated with all of the stuff that we have. And this is an attempt through policy to try to assign some of that cost to the creators of the stuff. And this is not a new framework. This is a framework that's existed for decades in generally in certain product areas. And I think a really great example of that, I come from California, where there's been a mattress EPR law in place for a long time. And what that means is mattress producers have to pay money and help create the infrastructure needed to deal with mattress waste. And for some products, it's easier than others to think about how this kind of thing would be constructed, but that's the concept. And then the specifics end up mattering a great deal. What products are covered, how it's implemented, what entities are involved. But I just want us to start at that 30,000 foot level. What is this? It's an attempt to deal with waste. It's an attempt to deal with the stuff that's put out and generated.
Absolutely, and that is super helpful to lay the foundation there, and to just sort of add on to that for everyone listening. If you think about historically, the way products are made is linear. It's called take, make, waste, right? You take from the resource, you manufacture a product. At the end of its life, it goes to the landfill, where it lasts for however long it lasts, and potentially pollutes the environment and groundwater and all sorts of other things. So EPR is, and correct me if I'm wrong, James, but I feel like is also very intertwined with circularity, and for how do we, instead of take, make, waste, create circular business models where after the consumer is done using the product, they know where to take it or where to send it to, so that the usable parts can be reused, remanufactured, and it's not sitting in a landfill. Is that
100%?
Yeah.
So once you take that premise of you want to internalize the costs of waste to the producers, you start to see, well, if the producers can say that there is less waste being generated, or if they can deal with that waste in a responsible manner, then it will cost less money. If there's less waste, then there is less cost. And you can start to spin that out into all kinds of different theoreticals. So, well, how are customers going to know what to do with their stuff at the end of life? That will require education campaigns in order to increase the amount of stuff that's being returned to the correct place, so that glass or cans aren't going into a conventional garbage can, but are instead going into a recycling can. It also means creating things that can be deconstructed at the end of their life and reused. So it means differentiating types of plastic so that they can be properly sorted into their feedstock. It means designing products so that they can be dismantled. In the mattress context, if you want to create less mattress waste, you have to be able to rip apart those mattresses and process them into their component parts. So what is a really basic framework of, well, we want to make sure that the costs associated with disposal or end of life are internalized. It creates an incentive system to think through all of the different types of costs associated with that product end of life. And so there are different parties involved here, and there are different incentives involved here, and we're going to get into each of these in turn. The parties involved here tend to be, producers, the folks who put things to market. There's the government, who are creating these requirements, and it tends to be state governments. That's what a lot of our waste streams are dealt with through state law, through state governments, or even localities. And then as an intermediary there tends to be an organization created called a PRO, or a producer responsibility organization. And the PRO plays this intermediary step where they organize producers. It doesn't necessarily make sense for mattress company X to create their own solution, and company Y to create their own solution, and company Z to create their own solution. Instead, let's all cooperate and work together under the auspices of this PRO, the Producer Responsibility Organization, to help create the infrastructure needed, or to fund the infrastructure needed, or to air commercials to tell consumers where to throw away their stuff, or create the website where folks can look up where they drop it off, or, it spins on and on and on. The PRO can also help create requirements to align the various organizations, the various businesses, to create products that ultimately increase circularity and feedback in, exactly what you were describing, Rick. And the PRO plays that role, being overseen by the state regulator. So we have kind of these three parties here. We've got the businesses, the PRO that's organizing things, and then the government.
Okay, and so and just as another point of sort of simplifying things a little bit, you hear extended producer, right? That's the key word, the producer responsibility. The PR is the producer is the first word, and by that we mean brand, basically, right? It's essentially whoever has their. It's like, the company, the brand may have someone else manufacture the mattress, but it's the brand that is responsible for it, not the person who manufactured for several brands. Is that
exactly?
Correct?
And I think this becomes a real challenge when you start looking at complex supply chains and the way products ultimately go to market. There are a lot of folks involved in deceptively simple products, and these regulations have to figure out a way to identify who they can regulate. One, who can they actually go after? And then two is, who has the most data? Who actually holds some leverage and information here where they can actually deal with the product and deal with the end of life. So these tend to focus on a US based brand. that tends to be the focus of these kinds of regulations. And then there are sort of catch-all provisions to try to get at weird circumstances where, let's say, the brand only exists internationally and is using an intermediary distributor to enter the US market. Then the distributor would be the producer. But for simplicity's sake, and especially for the audience that we're talking about here, it tends to be the brand. Okay. And the product itself is whatever the regulated product is. And as I'm sure we'll talk about, EPR has been adopted to target all kinds of different product sets, and it tends to be product by product. So there's a mattress EPR and PRO. There's hazardous materials EPR and PRO. And most relevant to our discussion today, there's packaging. And the challenge with packaging and the way it's been framed is it's not targeting packaging manufacturers, it's targeting folks who use packaging on their products. Right. And then a second one that I'm sure we'll talk about is textile EPR. So apparel, footwear, things like that. An EPR framework targeting those products. That's going to be, I mean, both of these are going to be really important for the industry to understand, and will lead to massive changes in the way that we shop and the way that we recreate.
Yeah, and I think just as that's a super important point, is like, this is, although this seems new because it's I guess in recent years been focused on new type product or segments, I guess, or however we want to say that. But in the U.S., but it also seems, and this is anecdotal, but I think it's true, because, for example, I just saw in Europe they're going to have they have an EPR for fishing tackle, and I think they're probably talking about commercial fishing tackle primarily. But I just kind of skimmed it. But the way that I sort of have seen this, and we may have talked about this in the last episode a little bit, but it's like the EU will set an EPR, and then typically a handful of U.S. states, California typically leads it, and then it catches on and more states get on board. So my point in saying that is that this isn't something that is going away. This is this EPR is something that brands need to understand today and in the future, because it's not something that's just, we decided not to do this anymore.
I mean, EPR, it's when you start to get into the weeds of it, you can see why it's such an appealing framework. It's designed to internalize costs to the producers, which by definition means that the government and taxpayers are not footing that bill, which means that it's a relatively inexpensive, at least from a government budget perspective, it's a relatively inexpensive regulation to put into place. The California example, I think, rings true here, where they conducted a budget calculation that it would have no impact on the budget. And the reason was all of those costs would end up getting reimbursed to the government by the producers. And so there is no budget impact. It becomes a really easy sell to a state legislature to say, well, we've got this thing or this policy framework that will internalize costs of waste, will increase circularity, and comes at no cost to us. Let's sign off on it. And so the replicability of this kind of thing is very easy. We've seen EPR in the packaging context get adopted in California, Colorado, Oregon. It's in the process in several other states across the country, including like Maryland, Maine. So it would not be surprising to see additional states added to that list this year and the next year and the next year, and more product categories being covered as well. And there are some creative additions to those product category lists. Like, I think Maryland now regulates those single-use gas cylinders through an EPR program, or those propane tanks through an EPR program. California with this new textile EPR law. it's going to be interesting to see what else ends up getting covered over the next few years.
It seems like lithium-ion batteries would be a no-brainer, right?
Oh, yes.
I mean, you're like, okay, where do we send all this stuff to? So that, and actually, and so, I'm based in Charleston. In South Carolina, there's a company, Redwood Materials, that recycles lithium-ion batteries. Have moved or are opening a facility in South Carolina. So I say that because with this, it seems like a burden to brands, but it's also an opportunity for to create new businesses and new business models and ways to recycle products when they're done, and ultimately it benefits the planet as a result.
Oh, 100%. And speaking of batteries, there is a battery stewardship or EPR program here in Washington State where I sit. So you were 100% on the nose that's an easy addition. I think the infrastructure needed to create these kinds of waste management and circularity programs, it's real. I mean, when we're talking about packaging, the infrastructure for that is mostly in place. And so the role of a PRO, the producer responsibility organization, in a packaging context is to collect data on packaging. So how much packaging are you sending to California? Or how much packaging are you sending to Oregon? And then associate fees to that quantity of packaging. So per pound fees. Those fees then go to localities, the folks who end up picking up the cardboard box and dealing with it at the recycling facility. That's a really easy model in the packaging context because we have that infrastructure in place. I know exactly where to put my cardboard. I know exactly where it goes. I know where the station is. I know where, how it's processed. But it's going to provide more money for those localities to deal with that waste. And for those localities that don't have that infrastructure in place, it may create that infrastructure for the first time. I mean, I lived in Montana for a bit. I remember learning for the first time that I had to drive my recycling to a centralized location in order to recycle it. It's a huge step. This might create funding for recycling pickups in communities that haven't had that before. It also, for unconventional materials or unconventional products like batteries, like textiles, we're going to see all kinds of innovations and onshoring of this infrastructure where textile recycling is going to have to happen in the US in order for it to be economically feasible, or with trading partners that have advantageous relationships. Like, it's going to have to be in the Americas. We're going to see all kinds of innovation in processing and circularity in the next few years as a result of these investments that are going to be made. It will cost money, but the benefits to sustainability, to the environment, to decrease the amount of waste that we're producing, they're going to be real.
So let's put maybe a finer point so with EPR for packaging, right? You talked about fees, but we kind of just said fees. So is that how EPR laws with packaging are going to affect fishing and outdoor brands? Is that, or let me rephrase. How will these laws impact fishing and outdoor brands related to fees?
Yeah. So functionally speaking, you might be wondering, well, I make packaging, or I make products that use packaging. I sell into markets like California. So what does this actually look like in concrete terms? It means that you have to join the PRO, the Producer Responsibility Organization. There are potentially avenues for self-compliance. They're not the most fleshed out, and they'd be something worth talking to someone about if you're interested in pursuing that. But largely speaking, joining the PRO, the Producer Responsibility Organization, is the best path forward for compliance. They provide resources to understand, what materials are or are not covered, business to business packaging versus packaging that is consumer facing, different types of consumer facing packaging, et cetera, et cetera. That those guidance documents can be really helpful for folks to understand what's in and outside of scope. But the first step is joining. After joining, there will come deadlines to first provide that PRO, and I haven't actually said what the PRO is. It's the Circular Action Alliance, or CAA. CAA is the only PRO that has been approved for the three most advanced EPR laws, those in California, Colorado, and Oregon. It's the sole PRO that's been approved in those states, and as a result, they are the only shop in town. And it'll be all kinds of folks in that organization, ranging from smaller brands to your Amazons and Walmarts. So everyone under the sun who uses packaging.
So that I was going to ask that. So that it is not just like, you see it in other laws where it's like companies doing this amount of revenue, and or like, hey, here's the threshold for who's this is, at least in California, I think that's what we're talking about, is companies of all sizes. Is that correct?
So there are exemption thresholds.
Okay.
If you give me a minute, I can actually try to find those. I should have pulled them up.
No, all good. So there are thresholds. That's kind of what I was getting at. I was like, so what if you're just like a small town, super small brand, and you're doing, $500,000 in sales, and you have packaging? Are you going to have to incur fees? Sounds like they're sort of protecting the smaller companies who are going, no, we know that you can absorb this and your impact is smaller. So we're targeting companies of a certain size to say, we know that you're generating a lot of plastic, or not plastic, but packaging waste, and we want to ensure that it is recyclable so that you don't have to incur fees.
Yeah. And I mean, the cutoffs are relatively small. Maybe not from a mom and pop fly shop perspective,
yeah.
But just to give you an idea, in California, it's producers with less than $1 million of annual gross sales in California.
So that's a lot of small to medium brands.
Yeah. That ends up covering quite a few folks.
Yeah.
In Oregon, they have kind of an interesting dual definition: producers with less than $5 million in gross revenue in their most recent fiscal year, or those that have sold less than 1 metric ton of covered products. So in that case, it's how heavy is your packaging, and also what is your size? There's sort of two different definitions there. And in Colorado, it's producers with less than $5.3 million in realized gross total revenue in the prior calendar year, or used or distributed less than 1 ton of covered materials into the state during the prior year. So it's worth taking a look at those definitions to see if you are exempt. But I agree, it's small to medium brands actually do have to take a look, and it may be you're exempt in one state, but not in another. And those kinds of calculations matter, because then you have an obligation to join.
And you also probably make sense for all brands at that point, rather than saying in this state we're going to do this, that, to say who's the most stringent, and let's just streamline this and say, let's make sure that we're meeting this state's requirements so that we know that we're meeting the others, just for simplicity's sake and not being redundant. But what are, like with EPR for packaging, okay, in these states, and maybe they're different by state, they probably are, but what are they basically asking for related to packaging? What are they saying? Like, hey, I don't want your clamshell packaging, or what are they asking for?
No, it's such a good question, and it is somewhat state by state. At an extremely basic level, what they're asking for is join the PRO, report the amount of stuff, the packaging stuff that you send into those states, and pay a fee. Which is why I say it's worth taking a look at whether you qualify or don't qualify in a particular state. You don't want to be paying fees if you don't have to be paying fees, but if you have to pay fees, you have to pay fees. The other thing that they're asking for, and this is sort of the second half of this EPR framework, I mean, built into the fact that you have to pay fees is the implicit, well, let's decrease the amount of packaging that we use so that we pay less in fees. So there's that incentive just built into the system right there. But there's a piggybacked set of incentives called eco-modulation that alters your fee calculation based off of things that you do to decrease the impact of the stuff you put onto market. And so some of those are incentives, some of them are mandates. The like most intense threshold mandate, if you're talking about what is the lowest common denominator or what's the strongest, and then you have to meet it. In California, there is a requirement, and I just want to pull it up here so that I'm not making things up. 100% of single-use packaging by 2032 must be recyclable or compostable in California. So yeah, go ahead.
Well, so that's sort of like, so if I'm a brand and I'm going, all right, how do I want to tackle this, right? If California is saying that by 2032, it's got to be 100% of your single-use packaging must be recyclable or compostable, then you've got to start thinking about, well, after you join the PRO, you've got to do an inventory of your packaging by state, right? And saying, what are the materials of our packaging? Once you understand that, then you need to think about, let's just say it's whatever type of plastic. Okay, is this recyclable in these states? Is this the type of plastic that can be recycled? Is it recyclable? Is it easily recyclable? Is it compostable? And if it's not those things, then where applicable, it seems like you might want to switch to a paper product or or something that you know is essentially harmless to the environment if it was, you want it to be recyclable, but paper, I think, is inherently recyclable or compostable, but maybe not.
Yeah, I mean, so when you're looking at both these sort of pieces, the fees piece and then the eco-modulation and the mandates as far as, you know, content go, they both push in the same direction. It's less stuff and more recyclable. On the fees piece, the fees are calculated on a material by material basis. How hard is that thing that you're putting to market to recycle? And if you look at the proposed fees, the only state where there are proposed fees out there, at least, so draft proposed fees, very preliminary, the incentives are very clear to move from things like plastic to things like paper, because the fees are so much less. So the per pound fee that's been released by CAA for Oregon, and this is again the draft form. It's you're talking for flexible plastics, 158. Is this? No, sorry. 71 cents per pound for flexible plastics. For paper, it's 3 cents.
Okay, so a clear incentive to move away from this. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we're talking about massive reductions in cost here on a per pound basis. And then beyond that, when you look at the eco-modulation and you look at the mandate, you have to look at, well, is this particular plastic recyclable? And California has put out a list of plastics that it considers to be recyclable. One of the real challenges, especially in the soft goods industry, is going to be single-use poly bags. Currently, California does not consider the materials that make most, if not all, single-use poly bags recyclable. That is going to be a massive challenge to figure out. Well, if the plastic bag manufacturing industry is not able to create a recyclable version of this or a compostable version of this, then we're going to need to rethink the way that we move soft goods through the economy, because that's not going to be available to folks anymore.
Interesting. And which also is something that you think about, because I've worked on this with clients some, and it's like the thought behind the poly bag. If you bought from a brand and you're like, why are they still using poly bags? And there are alternatives. But that being said, the initial thought behind that is there is an environmental impact of producing this product, and it makes sense to ensure that it is protected so that it's not harmed in transport, right? So that you essentially wasted it for nothing. But so that's just sort of the underlying thought. If you're just like, why is this stuff coming? That's what every brand is thinking. Let's protect our product so we're not it's not damaged in transport, and it gets to the customer and it's in good shape. But with this, it's either someone is going to have to create the innovation for recyclable poly bags or compostable poly bags, or find an alternative, or else face fees. That's essentially what the program is.
Well, so no, it would be banned in 2032. Oh. So the fees you have to pay no matter what packaging you put to market.
Okay. Fees are built.
Yeah. So the 2032 requirement, that's just a mandate.
Okay. So 2032 is what you're looking at to basically get it together.
Yep.
Yeah.
And the fees that you pay for your packaging are happening every year leading up to that in those relevant states. And the first reporting period is coming up in the next few months, actually.
So that, and I don't know if you have those timelines handy, but that was something that at least I wanted to see. What are some of the first ones that are coming online for brands to be thinking about?
Yeah, so in Oregon, the first producer reporting deadline is March 31st, 2025. And that's going to cover, if I remember correctly, 2024 benchmark data. So that way they understand sort of what the baseline is, how much packaging is entering the economy in Oregon, and then they can calculate fees and then ultimately allocate them. For fee payment begins July 2025 in Oregon. California and Colorado reporting starts end of August 2025. And that's going to cover the first quarter of 2025, if I remember correctly. And soon thereafter, I think so January of 2026, folks will start actually reporting more data and paying fees in Colorado and California. So we're not talking in scales of decades here. We're talking about this year, people are compiling data, reporting it, and paying for the packaging that they're putting to market.
So let's just run an example, okay? I am a small to medium apparel brand based in Charleston, South Carolina, and I sell products and ship products nationwide, including in Oregon, California, Colorado. Okay. So I've got to join a PRO. I've got to create baseline and embed this into our process of understanding packaging by material and by weight, into how much is going into these states. There will be a fee, no matter what, that there will be a fee associated with this. And I am incentivized. It will cost me less if I can put things that are packaging that is not plastic there's a paper alternative because my fee is going to be significantly less than if it's plastic. Does that all make sense?
You got it, man.
Okay. All right. So, if I'm a brand and you're listening to this, that's those are the steps, and I'll put this in a blog post or something to go with this. But that's what you need to be thinking about right now is, hey, I need to join a PRO, and I need to start collecting baseline packaging data from a material and weight standpoint because you have to. It's law.
Yeah, and I mean the PRO is an interesting entity. It's kind of simultaneously it's an advocate for the industry. It's a member organization. It is made up of all the brands who have joined it, ranging from Procter and Gamble to your small to medium apparel brand, and it plays that role of communicating to regulators and collecting data and collecting fees. It also is in part a regulator itself. It has an incentive to find people who are not complying because it decreases the amount of fees that the full group of folks end up paying. If they can increase the pool of who is in the PRO that they have to distribute a baseline quantity of dollars to, that decreases the fees for the average member of the pro or PRO. And so it has incentives to go out there and see who's not complying. So just something to keep in mind is that the PRO plays this dual role of advocate and support, but also enforcer. And so it's an interesting entity, and they certainly have that responsibility and incentive to find folks who are not joining.
So, okay. So we've talked about so here's what we just sort of here's what we know. EPR is not new. It's been based on different products for decades, or categories. Now, very specifically, which is super relevant as far as timing goes, it is being enacted as law, including fees, beginning as early as this year and next year and more in more states, right? But that's with packaging. What about the California textile? What does that look like from a timing perspective?
So this one, we're starting to talk about some longer timescales.
Okay.
The simplicity of creating an EPR framework for packaging. It's basically the opposite story for textiles. I mean, I don't have a textile bin that I just put things in and put it out onto the corner. We don't have municipalities running textile collection sites and processing this stuff. So there's going to be a huge amount of infrastructure needed for this law. So this is SB 707. This is a law that was passed in California at the end of the year. It got signed into law toward the end of the year, and it's been very buzzy because it's a really new thing that's going to affect pretty core products for the outdoor and the fishing industry. We're talking about the exact same model that we were just discussing for packaging. So there are producers, there's a PRO, there's the state government regulating these interactions and the requirements. Folks will have to join the PRO. So right now there is no PRO for textiles. There are going to be applications at the beginning of January 2026 for PROs. So that folks will propose, like, we want to be the PRO. The state will then select one PRO. Folks will have to join that PRO by July 2026. And over the course of the preceding 6 years, the PRO will start to create, first, it'll assess what need is out there. It's called a needs assessment. So what infrastructure is there for textile processing, and that's all kinds of different components. I mean, it's going to be collections, sorting, repair, um, uh, uh, recycling, dismantling. There's all kinds of infrastructure needed for the processing of textiles at scale. Um, and all of that is going to be part of the needs assessment. So they will study what is out there, how much will it cost to create what isn't there, how will we fund all of this, and ultimately get it online, with the goal of full implementation by 2032, including things like performance standards and eco-modulation in the textile category. And if you think about what I think is so useful about starting with the packaging example, is that that's really easy to understand. Yeah. To talk about things like the transition from plastic to paper, or from things that are hard to process to things that are easier to process. Apply that same principle, that same logic, to the textile world, and it's kind of mind-blowing. We're talking about, well, what raw materials in the textile world are easier to process and make new feedstock? What incentives do we want to create for products in the textile world to decrease the fee burden for the folks who are putting that stuff to market? It's going to be things like durability of the good. How long is it on the market before it becomes waste? So durability might become one of the features that is that's a premium, and you pay less. Dismantleability. So is it easy to tear apart into its component pieces? That may have implications for things like the use of blended fabrics, for example, which are hard to pull apart, as opposed to single material fabrics. Repairability, how well can we keep this on market? There are also built-in incentives in this law for things like secondhand markets. So having a secondhand market as a brand can help you decrease the amount of fees that you end up paying. I don't think it's a coincidence we're seeing the proliferation of these kinds of secondhand markets among brands. Yeah. So all of this stuff is TBD. What I'm describing is mostly theoretical at this point. The PRO needs to apply and be selected. It needs to do its needs assessment. It needs to design the fees and the eco-modulation. But there are going to be all kinds of interesting debates over the next 7 years about, for example, how do we price the per pound cost of cotton waste versus polyester waste? Or how do we talk about, what materials should or should not be used to have more or less impact on the environment? All kinds of things. And it's going to be a really exciting time, I think, actually.
Well, exciting and probably terrifying if you're a brand, but if you're a sustainability nerd like I am, I see all these challenges as opportunities, right? And so it's like it's an opportunity to innovate, it's an opportunity to do better, and I think probably for a lot of brands it may be kind of. I don't know. I am predicting that we are on a journey back to nature, and it's like it's easier to sort and separate 100% organic cotton versus a blended T-shirt. It's just I think it's just think simple, right? And the simpler the better is probably something that this is just my personal opinion that I think is going to benefit brands in the long run, but. I do want to ask you, because I know we got a few more minutes here, but okay, here's the opposite end of this. It's like, okay, here's what all the brands should do. What are the legal risk or compliance risks for not doing that? What if you're like, you know what? Like, yeah, I'm a $10 million SME and I don't really I'm not changing my packaging. What happens then? What are the risks associated with that?
Yeah, so the risks associated with that are penalties and enforcement. So as I sort of described, the PRO
Yeah.
has this enforcement role. There's also a state agency that oversees and similarly has an enforcement role. Um, a lot of these penalties are calculated on a per day basis, and so failure to join the PRO, failure to report, things like that. The penalties can stack up real quick with these kinds of provisions. So it's worth kicking the tires on and doing some due diligence.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, this is one of the benefits of being an environmental lawyer is that I'm very familiar with these kinds of penalty calculations. The environmental laws tend to be calculated on a per violation per day basis. And just the reality of these kinds of systems is they add up really fast.
So it can cost you quite a bit. So
Yeah.
the business case here is designed for the environment, designed for sustainability.
Yeah.
Join this PRO, get your baseline data, get your ducks in a row, and probably follow the path of smallest fee to guide you on probably what makes the most sense for you as a business.
Yeah.
But I am curious what advice would you give to fishing and outdoor brands that are trying to prepare for these new and upcoming EPR laws? And you can, if it's easier, look, because the apparel stuff or textile stuff is a little bit TBD. So let's focus on packaging. What advice would you give to a brand who's trying to prepare for this?
Assess how you're going to do this. I mean, I think a lot of this sort of data collection, data management work, it's very similar across these different subject matters. Like whether we're talking about packaging or we're talking about climate or we're talking about forced labor or we're talking about, fill in the blank. These are data management exercises, and you don't want to have to reinvent the wheel every time that you have to do one of these things. So think about how you're going to deploy resources effectively again and again in the future to do this kind of thing. This won't be the last time that you get asked about this particular SKU or about this particular product, this particular style number. And so thinking about how you're going to collect data in a robust way and store it in a style by style way, or think through, who's going to be in charge of this, who's going to think through the architecture. And maybe that's someone internally. It's like a compliance person, or it's a development person, or it's a designer person, or an environmental person, or kind of you name it, a sustainability person. Think about who's going to own it internally, and whether you need to deploy external resources as well. It's worth thinking about consultants. It's worth thinking about legal. It's worth thinking about all of these kinds of things. I think my other piece of advice, and this isn't legal advice. None of this has been.
Yeah.
But,
to be clear.
To be clear. But I mean, I think the incentives here are pretty clear, and they're what you were describing, Rick. It's like folks who are doing the work from a sustainability perspective are going to be ahead of the curve. So what is frontier sustainability work, thinking through your material composition, your packaging, phasing out plastic, doing all those kinds of things, it may be considered frontier now, but 10 years from now, that stuff is going to be fundamental compliance work. Like, it's not going to be frontier, nice to have stuff. This is going to be actually fundamental to the business and fundamental to being able to access markets like California. which is a pretty big market. So thinking through how you're going to take on these challenges, thinking about the next steps, and being creative and taking sustainability seriously, they're going to benefit you in the long term.
Yeah, and I think that is probably a pretty good note to wrap on, James, because for any brand that is using this as a way to sort of get up to speed in relatively short order on EPR, particularly related to packaging, sustainability there's different drivers for it. Regulation is one of them, and as sustainability becomes compliance, the opportunity for you as a brand to be an early adopter is to capture market share and get a competitive advantage by really doing something you're going to have to do anyway. But if you lean into it and use it as a marketing advantage, there really could be a huge upside for you. So just another reason, aside from the fees, if you needed other incentive to dive into sustainability, there it is. So. All right, well, James, this will be the second episode in a series that we're doing, okay? We've got a couple more with James that we're going to be talking about chemicals and PFAS-related regulations, and we'll also do one on climate regulations. So stay tuned for that, and special thanks to James Pollack from Marten Law for sitting in and providing some great educational information for folks out there to absorb.
I appreciate the invitation, Rick, and I look forward to the future conversations. And you still haven't asked me about fishing yet.
Oh, well,
maybe the next one.
No.
No, I've got to run. It's too late, Rick.
Next one.
People are gonna have to wait to hear about the fantastic fish I caught this last summer.
Well, you know what? We're gonna save it then. All right.
Well, thanks for the invitation, Rick. It's really great to chat with you, as always.
Special thanks to James Pollack for all he does to protect what he loves, and stay tuned for the next episode of the Rise of Sustainability Regulations, which will be on climate-related disclosures and will drop next Friday. If you enjoyed this episode, an absolutely free way to support the show is by leaving it a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It's a chance to tell me what you love about the show, and it helps others discover it too. Thanks for listening and for protecting what you love.